So when we proclaim the name of Jesus, power is released.
Welcome to New Dawn Community Church, the message of the week with Pastor Randall Cutter.
Okay, if you'll open up your Bibles to the book of Acts. We are in the last chapter of Acts. Is that a band? The last, okay, anyway. We are in Acts chapter 28 today, starting with verse 1. So if you have your Bible with you, or if you follow along on a device, Acts chapter 28 today, starting with verse 1. And as we are finishing the book of Acts, since chapter 9 virtually, and not quite there, but that's where we saw Paul converted, or Saul converted, and his name started to be known as Paul. Acts chapter 13 is where he was called into ministry, and since Acts chapter 13, we have pretty much seen the book of Acts focus on Paul and the things he was involved in. Of course, Acts 15 was the Jerusalem Council, and that was instigated because of Paul's ministry and Peter's ministry. And so all of that is, we have been focused on Paul for a major portion of the book of Acts. And now we are getting to the place where we are going to leave him in Rome at the end of the book of Acts. But during the entire time that we have seen him, we've seen great success, but we've not seen a tremendous amount of time where he is free from persecution. I mean, it's just not. We've not seen a whole lot of what we would call favor. We've seen a lot of miracles, that's favor. We've seen a lot of breakthroughs, that's favor. We've seen a lot of salvations, that's favor. But as far as his personal comfort level goes, we haven't seen a lot of that. Because it wasn't about his personal comfort. It was about his ministry, his calling, his purpose. Today we see favor. Today we see that the Lord gave him is giving him a bit of a recharge before he gets to Rome. Where it's amazing every time he's just been on a ship for a couple of weeks, being tossed in a storm. Before that, he was stuck 2 years in Caesarea after being beaten almost to death in Jerusalem. And he has been on a shelf, if you will. And now he's getting to the end of his journey. They've shipwrecked on Malta. And that's where we left off last week. Everyone got onto the shore. The ship was beaten apart by the waves, but everyone, as Paul said, was able to make it to the shore safely. Now, by the way, we already have heard there were 276 people on that boat. 276 people showing up in the middle of winter on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, which is all... no one's getting to them by ship. No one's bringing provisions because you can't sail the Mediterranean from October to March back then. And so all of a sudden, 276 extra mouths to feed is a big deal, especially on an island that's not that big. And so you'd expect the residents of the island to be a little bit less than nice to the people who have now washed up on their shore, because they got to take care of these 276 people who didn't have the common decency to bring the grain from the ship before it sank. And so you expect a bit of hostility, or at least indifference. It wasn't like they were all going to go out hunting, because those animals were long gone on an island that was populated in the Mediterranean. So, but that's not what we see at all. We see an incredible amount of favor which is being poured out on these individuals who show up. So I've got the title for today, When Favor Arrives. Finally, when favor arrives. And there's a whole lot of favor that we see every step of the way. Even when something negative happens to Paul in this situation, it doesn't impact him. That's favor. There's just favor everywhere we go. So we are in the book of Acts, chapter 28, verse 1 today. Just a reminder, and you all know this already, but if you're streaming with us, you may not. The scripture that I am using today is a translation from the Greek that I did. And so it's always good for you to have your own translation, your favorite translation in front of you. I usually point out the things that are different if there's anything more than just different word choices, synonyms, and stuff like that. So, Acts chapter 28, starting with verse 1, just the first couple of verses, gets us back into what's going on. After we were safe, we discovered that the island was called Malta. The indigenous people demonstrated unusual hospitality to us, welcoming us all as guests and kindling a fire because it was rainy and cold. So they end up in Malta. Melita is the way they would have called it, but Malta to us. And when they got on, it says they discovered they were on Malta, and maybe because one of the sailors ran up to a top of a ridge and said, "Oh, we're in Malta," because he was able to recognize it from there. Or they may have run into the residents right away who came and said, "Oh, no, you're on Melita, Malta." And so they got into the place, and the indigenous people, some of your translations will say the islanders or the natives. However, what it really says is the barbarians. Yeah, I mean, it's the barbarians on the island. That lets us know that they weren't Greek or Latin speaking, or, Roman speaking. That wasn't their language. And Romans called anyone, and Greeks, who did not speak one of the civilized languages barbarians, and it was a word that sounded, the words onomatopoeic, words where it to them, whenever anyone spoke from a different language, they sounded like bar, 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 bar. And that's literally where they came up with the word barbarians. And both Greek and Latin had the same word in it because of that. So it wasn't a pejorative word, and so now you're stuck because you can't really translate it barbarians, because that's a pejorative. That's a negative in our language, and so now you got to figure out a word to use. And of course, I used indigenous people, and the other natives, islanders, whatever is what they do. So they spoke probably Punic or Carthaginian. They were settlers probably from Phoenicia who had settled on the northern shores of Africa by Carthage and then colonized the island. So now here's the thing. Again, they should have had a lot of concern about having all these people dumped on their shore. And Luke says they showed over and above generosity and kindness. That was, they were welcoming everyone, unusual hospitality. And that, like I said, that's a sign of favor right up front. They made it to shore alive. Huge favor. But now they're being received by the people. It's rainy and cold. It is the winter season. And so the islanders help them start building a fire. And so, of course, everyone that's there that is able to goes out and starts to gather firewood, kindling, to be able to help build the fire. And so we have the Apostle Paul doing the exact same thing. After Paul had gathered a number of sticks and was placing them on the fire, a viper was driven out by the heat and fastened onto his hand. When the people of the island saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "Certainly this man is a murderer. He escaped from the sea, but justice has not allowed him to live." That was their conclusion, of course. But anyway, so Paul was helping to gather the wood. He probably was no longer chained to a Roman soldier. Y'all know why? Because they left the chains back on the boat. They'd left their armor back on the boat because they weren't going to be swimming in their armor. They had left a lot on the boat. Probably they had their swords. They could fasten those or tie them on back of their, backs or whatever. But the soldiers were down to just what they absolutely needed to protect their prisoners and to defend themselves from any problems on the island. But they no longer had all of the stuff that they previously had. And so unless the soldiers borrowed new chains, which probably didn't happen because of what we see happening next, Paul probably during this entire time on the island wasn't in chains. That would be about the first time he was this free in a long time, because they kept chains on a prisoner all the time. Because remember, if a Roman soldier lost his prisoner, it was life for life. And so you may have liked the guy a lot, but you weren't about to risk your life for the guy. And so you kept him on a chain as much as you could. So Paul was helping gather wood. He was probably able to do so freely with everyone else. And he took his bundle of sticks, on the ground. Oh, here's a bundle of sticks. And there was a viper hidden in the sticks. They aren't that big. And Malta doesn't have vipers anymore today, but neither do other islands that used to have vipers too, because, people live around for a while on these islands. They get rid of things like that. That's civilizing your island. You do know we do that. We exercise dominion over the places that we go. When I first moved into the property that we used to live on, there were tons and tons of those banana spiders everywhere. And there were wasps everywhere. By the time we moved from it, we had none of that stuff. Why? Because we exercised dominion, right? I would drive around mowing the lawn, and I'd have a can of wasp spray in my tractor because it took out the spiders and the wasps. And then every once in a while, if I saw a snake, I would dive off of the tractor with my knife, like most human beings will do. No videos. The only video we had was when we had a beehive once, and I stumbled into it, and the video catches me running across the yard away from the bees as quickly as my 2 feet could carry me. So anyway, so Paul has this poisonous viper fastened onto his hand. By the way, I actually read this commentary. Someone said, well, it might not have really been poisonous because of the fact that vipers, poisonous vipers generally bite and then they let go. This viper had been in the fire. The idea that it was going to act normally when it was being burned to death is probably not. So some of the things that you read, when you read it, you go, someone's not thinking. Okay. By the way, how do we know it was a poisonous viper? Because the islanders said it was a poisonous viper. They knew it, and that's what they called it. They knew exactly what that thing was, and it was poisonous. And they were waiting for some negative impact. So, by the way, they concluded that the Greek goddess Dike, who is the god of righteousness, or justice, I should say, that justice, Dike, that was one of their goddesses, wasn't going to let him live. There was a whole theme in the ancient world about sailors or people who had been saved and rescued from this raging sea, and they'd climb up on shore and something else would get him. And one of the stories, it was a viper. And so there's even a poem about that, that, the guy gets out of the sea, but he should have just let the waves, drown him, because it would have been better than dying of the snake bite. So this is all in their minds. Oh, here's another one. He escaped the sea, but justice is not going to let him live. They concluded that he deserves it. He must be a murderer, because otherwise, so their idea, here's the thing. When our speaker went down this morning, I didn't conclude that it was a murderer. Nor did I conclude that anyone in the place was a murderer. Okay? Although you heard just now a little bit of a confession about if a snake is, around, there might be some, things that happen to me. But the conclusion that we draw from negative things in the understanding of the kingdom that we have is not that the person deserves it. The conclusion we draw is that Satan and his minions hate their guts, or our guts, and wants to harm us. He's the one who steals, kills, and destroys. And as I mentioned on Friday night, just like the Lord allowed some of the nations to remain in Canaan so that Israel would not get flabby and weak in its ability to carry on warfare, so we have those same opportunities. The Lord could just come in like he did for Job and put a hedge around him. And with that hedge, I imagine if you'd have sat down and talked to Job and said, boy, your life is easy, before the book of Job was written, he'd have said, let me tell you how easy it's been and the amount of blood, sweat, and tears I've had to put into developing this whole enterprise. Because he was living in a fallen world too. But even with a hedge around him, he still had the same levels of energy that needed to be put out to be able to tame the world in which we live. And we recognize that God, even though Jesus is now the victorious one, still allows Satan to be able to keep us in fit warrior shape. So if all of a sudden I recognize, you know what, we got a bunch of equipment going south right now, I think, okay, that means we need to up our focus on prayer over our equipment. It's part of what you do. And I don't automatically conclude, well, certainly we must have sinned in some way. Now, by the way, sinning in some ways, almost a given. We all have feet that are dragging on the ground, and Jesus said we need to have them clean. That's why we have short accounts with our God as we get to the end of the day and say, Lord, if I've done anything, and bring it to my mind so I can repent of it, otherwise just cover it all. I mean, that's a given living in this world in which we live. You have a hard time driving without thinking really ill about some of the people around you. But, and this is what I always think, that could be a congregation member. Stops me from thinking really negatively. So I have a lot more compassion then. But okay, so anyway, their conclusion was, hey, this particular thing was a problem. So they said, hey, this man is a murderer. He escaped from the sea, but justice has not allowed him to live. Now, it's interesting because we have a scripture, Mark 16, 17 to 18. It says, these confirmations will accompany those who have believed. In my name they will expel demons. They will speak with new languages. They will take up snakes with their hands. That was an inadvertent. But understand, inadvertent. This was not something that was a part of, I think I'll pick up a snake today. Okay? And they should drink anything. This talks about if there's attacks or accidents and things that can happen against them. Although if you drink soft drinks, probably, you are doing something that's a little deadly. But, okay. And by the way, that's a joke. Have faith for whatever you drink. So anyway, okay. But anyway, so this, they'll pick up snakes and says it won't harm them at all. So let's give Paul the test. Then Paul shook the creature off into the fire and suffered no negative effects. They were expecting him to fall sick with a fever or suddenly fall down dead. But after they waited for a long time and did not see anything unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and began to say that he was a god. Fickle people, don't you think? He's a murderer. Oh, he's a god. There's a little bit in between those 2 points, I think, maybe. Okay, so Paul shook the creature. By the way, I've translated creature because that's actually what the Greek word says, creature. Some of your translations might say animal. Most of them say snake because they're going, I'm not going to say creature. I'm just not going to write that on my Bible translation. So anyway, he had no negative effects. He got this thing. They're thinking, oh my goodness, they expect him. Some of your translations say they expected him to swell from the bite, and that the word can mean swell or can mean have a fever, become feverish, which would, both of those things could happen if you're bitten by a viper. So, either one. The islanders were waiting. It says they were watching him. Can you imagine? They're in the cold, the rain, the fire's being built up, and they're watching him very closely. And by the way, Paul knows they're watching him. And he's probably going, Lord, it'd be a good time not to have me fall over dead. Now, by the way, he knows he's not going to fall over dead. Why? Because he's already been told he's going to Rome. But the way this journey has gone, he could, well, maybe I'll get a little fever out of it. I mean, it's been a very arduous journey, but they had such favor now that they got onto the island, and they have favor from the people, And it'd be nice not to have any impact from this viper, and it didn't happen. And because of the fact that there was no negative impact, they decided that he was deity. Now, obviously, they didn't start proclaiming it and start to sacrifice to him, as that had happened on one of his journeys when they said, "Oh, these guys are Hermes and Zeus, and we're going to celebrate and offer sacrifices to him." By the way, there he ended up getting stoned. When they left him for dead, and but here apparently they didn't proclaim it over him, so Luke probably caught on to it later and wrote it down. Okay, so no ill effects. In the region around that place, the lands were owned by the first man of the island. His name was Publius. He welcomed us in a friendly manner and entertained us as guests for 3 days. The father of Publius was confined to bed, sick with fevers and dysentery, but Paul went to visit him. He prayed, placed his hands on him, and healed him. After this had happened, the rest of those on the island who had sicknesses came and were healed. Okay, so we're introduced to Publius, who owns an estate nearby. He is called the first man of the island. By the way, that was his official title, given by Augustus himself. He was called the first man. That was the way they referred to him. It's not really the normal way, Romans. The way that it was given to him was the chief man over all in the municipality of Malta, and chief and first are the same word. So the first man of the island was there. And he had been appointed by Augustus, or that particular position was appointed by Augustus. And so he was entertaining everyone for 3 days. When you first hear that he entertained everyone for 3 days, you think, how did he entertain 276 people? It was a big estate. And here's the problem. He's in charge of the island, and he's got to make sure all these 276 people get parceled out around the island to be lodged and taken care of in the best possible way. Well, that wasn't going to happen in 24 hours, and so what he did is he invites all these people off the seashore to his estate, does everything that he can to do provisions for them for the next 3 days, while at the same time they're working like crazy to get patrons to take the people as they're able to. This is a huge endeavor to be able to get everyone that they can get. He wasn't going to hold everyone at his estate all those days. He was going to have to make sure that they started to move on. So they were entertained for 3 days while he sorted things out. And it turns out his father had a case of what is pretty clearly called Malta fever. It was a disease which had just was well known. It wasn't just on Malta, it was on some of the other Mediterranean islands. And it turns out, we found out in the 1800s, that it was caused by a microbe in the goat's milk. But when you got this fever, dysentery, or this sickness, Malta fever, you get dysentery, you get repeated bouts of fever, which is why Luke says fevers, plural, because it would come back and bite you. That plural of the word fever is what lets us know it was repeated bouts of fever, and then, of course, it's like there's one there's one thing that we can say, oh yeah, sounds like Malta fever to me, as our expert opinion goes, this many centuries and millennia afterwards, diagnosing the case. But, by the way, they did get a vaccine for this, so they don't suffer it today unless they're not vaccinated. They are able to eat the goat cheese and drink the goat milk, although why anyone would want to do either of those things. Back then, you'd eat anything and drink whatever was protein. You just were making sure, or fat or whatever, calories, you made sure that you were eating and drinking. Goats were well thought of in those days. They're well thought of by many people in the United States today, even, just not Wisconsin dairy people. Nah. That, when you're born in Wisconsin, they lean over the crib while you're yet not able to speak and say, "Don't drink goat's milk. Goat milk bad. Cow milk good." So, okay, all of that. So he has this fever, and this thing could go on for 4 months to 2 years. I mean, this is, and it could kill people too. I mean, obviously, with dysentery and dehydration and all of those things. And so this was a bad deal. And so his father having this particular disease, Publius' father, is a really bad deal because especially for an elderly person, there's no guarantees he's gonna get over it. It could kill him easily at any time. And so Paul goes in, visits him, and it says that Paul, when he went in to visit him, he prayed, placed his hands on him, and healed him. Okay? 3 things. Prayed, placed his hands on him, and the laying on of hands is often what it's called. And then he healed him. It was healing time, and he got done with the healing. His father was healed. And as a result, the rest of those on the island who had Malta fever or anything else started bringing their sick to Paul. And you had a general revival going on. They show up, 276 people are thrown ashore in Malta. One day, the Malta people are all there. The Maltese are having a great time just living their lives in the winter. And the next day, they're in the midst of a spiritual revival because of a shipwreck. Because all of a sudden, everyone's getting healed. You know what that would do to the atmosphere. I mean, think about what happened around Jesus whenever everyone was getting healed. It changes everything. Everyone's going to come out. The chance that Paul has to preach the gospel is incredible. I mean, and you hear the favor of God in this. Even the fact that Publius invites them in onto his estate to be able to start sorting out where everyone is going to stay, Paul could have gone anywhere. He didn't need to find out that the first man of the island had a sick father, but because they were on his estate, he hears about it. And because he hears about it, and by then, even the Roman soldiers would have said to him, hey, by the way, you should talk to that guy. Because they'd seen enough by now. And so he has a chance to go in, which means he's invited. Publius is not just letting anyone into his house to see his father. And so Paul is invited. He goes in, prays, takes full advantage of the situation, and watches God heal the father. Now the leading man of the island knows that this guy's got some healing power in him. And with his consent, the word goes out across the island. And they're going to put this guy to work. If he can heal people like this is better than medicine. And so we're going to see people healed. And suddenly Paul's got a wide open door to be able to minister. Now remember, it's winter, which means the Mediterranean is closed. They're stuck on the island. We'll find out that they were there 3 months, and actually that was a short time. The only reason that they're able to leave as early as February is because they were going to be doing shore hopping. We'll see that. They were going to be hopping from place to place on shore, basically, close enough where they would have always be covered by some island or some landmass to where they would not get caught in the storm in a horrible way. But there was no sailing the Mediterranean until mid-March. So they were stuck on that island for a while. And that means for 3 months, Paul had unfettered access to all the people of Malta who were interested in hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ from them. I wonder if it's coincidence that Malta became the place that stopped the Turks as they were coming in, or the Islamic conquest of Europe. That was the place. They just couldn't get by Malta. Malta put up such a defense, and it was incredible. So. But it's interesting because this would, of course, be one of the times when God had an opportunity to establish a beachhead on Malta. And their kindness, do you think there might have been some kind of thing going on historically with God? That their kindness to the apostle was repaid by the fact that they just could not get overrun and then when they did get overrun, they had a chance to be able to retreat under favorable circumstances and leave the island. I mean, it was an incredible story. Rick Joyner has written a book about it. Very cool story. Okay, I'm speculating, but there is certainly some history here. Okay. And it just didn't stop with this revival going on. If you look at verses 10 and 11, they honored us with many gifts. And when it was time to set sail, they provided the things that we needed. After 3 months on the island, we set sail in a ship that had spent the winter there. It was an Alexandrian ship with the twins as the figurehead. Okay. It says they were honored with much honor. By the way, the Greek word honor, Luke, whenever he uses it, is talking about money. He's talking about gifts. He's talking about things of substance. And literally, he says, they honored us with much honor. And it's talking about gifts. That's what they did. They didn't have a lot of speeches over them. They just simply made sure they took care of them. They watched over them. They helped them. And then when they got time to leave the island, remember, they lost everything. They basically got to shore with the clothes on their back, and they needed a lot of provision to be able to continue along the way. And because they needed provision, the islanders provided it. They were in the middle of a revival. We know what happens in the middle of a revival. People hold loosely to their things. And they say, I'm going to share it. And they were sharing. Probably, Luke is talking very much focused on Paul and his party, but the other 270 some would have also been benefited from this particular thing just because of the goodwill that would have been everywhere as people were helping. And they helped everyone to be able to have the provisions they needed to be able to go on board this Alexandrian ship. Now, we don't know how many of them actually took this opportunity with this particular ship. Some of them may have said, let's wait until it gets even nicer out, because it wasn't great sailing weather yet by the time they left. So they provided for them for the journey. They gave them honorariums and whatever else they needed. And they found an Alexandrian ship. Now remember, it was an Alexandrian ship that Paul had been shipwrecked in. These were the grain carriers, and they had incentive, as I told you not last time, but one of the times before, they had incentive to press through the bad weather in the Mediterranean. They got bonuses for delivering grain to Rome during the bad season. So this guy had made it as far as Malta and said, I can't go any further right now, November, December, January, and had said, I can't leave. It was just too dangerous. Even to just go the short way, relatively speaking, up to Rome could not happen during that season. But as early as he could go, he was going, because there were still bonuses to be had. And the Mediterranean had not yet opened up. So here was a ship going. The centurion, Julius, has to make the arrangements and make sure he takes his people on board, because he wants to get going. And but of the 276, who knows how many of them stayed and how many of them went. Their time on the island may have been over. I mean, the first man may have said, we're about at the end of our hospitality for 276 of you, and it's time for you to go on with your journey. That could have happened too. So it's an Alexandrian ship, and the twins were a part of it. The Dioscuri. I'm not Italian enough to say that. The Dioscuri. Yeah, that's it. Got it. Okay. That's what they were called. Okay, and but it just means the twins. The ship was probably called the Dioscuri, and it just means the twins. And the twins were Castor and Pollux, and the Gemini was their constellation. The twins. Okay, and they were viewed as the patron gods of all seafarers. So that's why they'd have them on a ship. They always had their figurehead. And as I'm saying this, Dawn is having bad memories. Good ones. Oh yeah, this was good, because when we were in college, we attended together, and some classes we took together, and the guy that taught the New Testament, we taught the book of Acts, and like many people, when you're studying for a test, you just don't go for the minutia. Now, by the way, I'm finding out the word Castor and Pollux are not in the text as I'm translating this, right? However, the twins are. The NIV says Castor and Pollux. They don't say the twins. They actually say Castor and Pollux. But that's not in the Greek. That's just there. That's what the twins refers to. So I don't have a problem with them doing that. But in the tests that we took after going through the book of Acts, Dawn and I are studying together, and I had made my list of the things that were important to know. And I knew how this guy tested. He asked for details. You had to know the memory, the details. You had to know Paul did this and went there and did that. And Dawn said, and what was the figurehead, she said to me, on the front of the ship that Paul took from Malta to Rome? And I said, no one would ask that question. No one who is not a very, very mean individual, because it means nothing for the flow of the narrative. And then I said, okay, who are they? She says, castor oil and Polacks. Now, I have a lot of Polish background, so it was easy for me to remember. And so I went, next day on the test, what were the twin gods on the ship? She did a end zone dance. And because of the fact that she had said that to me, I remembered them, especially because of how she said them. So on that particular test, the professor actually announced that the top 2 grades in the class were husband and wife. I'll leave it to your imagination which of us had the top grade. Okay, anyway, so this was just, eyewitness account, obviously. He was there, he saw the Dioscuri, and he said, okay, I'm going to just add that in because it's kind of funny if you think about it. These are the patron gods of the seafarers, and one of the Alexandrian ships that they were just on had crashed, obviously, hadn't done a great job. Okay, so now they get on this particular ship. After we put in at Syracuse, New York, no. After we put in at Syracuse, they got blown off course again. Way off course, okay. After we put in at Syracuse, we stayed there 3 days. From there, we weighed anchor and arrived in Rhegium. After a day, a south wind came up, and on the second day, we came to Puteoli. We found some brothers there and were invited to stay with them for 7 days, and this is the way we came to Rome. So, we got 3 days in. This tells you they had to wait. The weather was so bad that they got to Syracuse and they had to wait for good weather. They couldn't go any further, so they were stuck there 3 days. Just to give you an idea what the map looks like here, they were down in Malta on the south side of the south area there, the bottom part of the map, and then they went up to Syracuse and they're stuck there 3 days. And then they finally said, okay, we can make it to Rhegium. One of the alternate readings in the Greek language makes it sound like it really took a long time. They had to do a bunch of things back and forth and everything to get up to Rhegium because the weather was so bad yet, and so they even waited in Rhegium. But as they were on their way up, then they made it, and Syracuse, Rhegium, then we'll see Puteoli also. So they were 3 days in Syracuse. They were a day in Rhegium. They were 2 more in Puteoli, thank you. I was going to say, Scott, tell me how you pronounce it, because Scott texted me right before the message started and said, that's where I lived for how long? 5 years. Okay, so I knew that he would have the pronunciation down for me. Puteoli. Okay, very good. Who knows what they said at 2000? It was Latin, they would have said it whatever the Latin was. So, anyway, so they went to Puteoli, and we found on the second day they came to Puteoli. We found some brothers there, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. Okay, that's they stayed with some Christian brothers and sisters for 7 days. Now here again, they were up at Puteoli. By the way, that's right next to Puteoli. That's right next to Naples. I didn't put Naples on the map, but it's right next to Naples today. Naples is just a bit east of it. And then there's the Appian Way is right there, which would be one of the paths that Paul could have taken. Or there's the Via Campana, which is also there. Either one of those routes they could have taken to Rome because they just kind of go up around some mountainous areas. So they were able to stay with some brothers and sisters in Rome, in Puteoli. By the way, more than likely, that was because the centurion, they got on shore and he needed to restock his equipment. He got some equipment in Malta. You can count on it as they were, with the officials there. But if he's going to transport prisoners on foot all the way up to Rome, and maybe he didn't, maybe he got a conveyance, who knows. But it takes some time. He needed to get, probably get orders. Hey, we were shipwrecked, we're really late. Get orders, a messenger up to Rome, get the word back. So 7 days they stayed with those Christians. Again, great favor. In this entire thing, you're hearing great favor. And then in this particular section, when the brothers there heard the reports about us, they came as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. When Paul saw them, he gave thanks to God and took courage. And when we arrived in Rome, Paul was permitted to stay by himself with the soldier who was guarding him. All of this is great favor. They got 7 days to recover in Puteoli. I'm going to forget the pronunciation after today. So if I ever bring it up again, don't hold me to it. So, okay. But the Roman Christians came to meet him. Why? Well, for 7 days they had been down there, and obviously some messages had got up to Rome. And how did the Roman Christians know about Paul? Because 3 years earlier, he had written them a letter, which we call the book of Romans. And now they heard Paul's coming. And so they got kind of excited about it. And they heard the reports that they were there, and they came down to the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet them. And that's just to give you where on the map again. You can see where they had landed. And then they came from Rome down to the 3 taverns, and they came to the Forum of Appius. So a group stayed in the 3 taverns, and a group went on to the Forum of Appius, and probably because they thought, we don't know what road they're taking, and so they wanted to make sure they had things covered. So as bad as everything was at the beginning of this journey and through the shipwreck, all of the things that had happened, here it's like favor is multiplied on favor every step of the way. So the brothers and the group from Rome came. When Paul saw them, he gave thanks to God and took courage. And here's the thing. Paul was a prisoner, and he was on his way to be judged by Nero. How is he going to be received in Rome? Were they going to be a little bit of concerned about their own personal safety getting so close to this man? Or were they going to really receive him? And remember in Romans chapter 1, Paul had said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And, well, I think I've got those scriptures up there. Paul said, Romans 1:16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, both to the Jew first and to the Greek. And then in 2 Timothy, he wrote 2 Timothy 1 after this. He said, therefore do not be ashamed of the testimony of the Lord, nor of me, his prisoner, but join in suffering for the gospel through the power of God. So these guys, this was a big deal to Paul. Number one, he wasn't ashamed of the gospel, and they weren't either. Even though he was now a prisoner for the Lord, they were willing to publicly identify with him. And when he's writing to Timothy later, at the end of his life, his second appearance in Rome, he says, don't be ashamed of me, his prisoner. This had to impact him in a huge way. And that's why it says, Luke just says, he took courage. Your translation, if you have the NIV, says he was encouraged. It's the same concept, obviously. But this is a huge moment for Paul to see. It's like there's this, can you imagine being one of the other prisoners? Number one, you've seen Paul treated like a rock star on an island of Malta, right? You've seen him have influence all the way on the journey, and now they get to the place where he's going to be judged, and he gets his own parade. This is a festal procession. These are the people waiting to greet him. They couldn't wait for him to get there. And so suddenly this guy, who is a prisoner, by now back chained to a guard, has a whole bunch of people escorting him back into Rome with celebration on their hearts because he was there. No wonder he took courage. That's amazing. So, anyway, then they got there, and Paul was able to live in his own house. Paul was permitted to stay by himself with the soldier who was guarding him. That's amazing. Again, for the entire time that he was there, he was able to be receiving guests, preaching the gospel, having impact on the court of Rome. This is why I entitled this message Favor. It's like every step of the way. It's like all of that pain that he had experienced to begin with. God just said, well, that's enough for now. Boom, I need you to get your strength back to be able to face what's coming. And what was coming was 2 years of ministering to the Jewish people and everyone else in Rome. What was coming was an opportunity to stand in front of Nero, and he needed all the courage he could get to be able to proclaim the gospel in front of Nero. And the Lord went out of his way to give him the refreshing that he needed so that he was able to take his stand. And next week, we'll see him taking that stand, at least partially. when our lives are going through difficulty, and I already shared with you today that the Lord uses those difficulties to continue to make us warriors for the things that He has in front of us. You know, some of the things that you face right now would have overwhelmed you 20 years ago. You couldn't even have thought of it. You couldn't have comprehended it. When you first came to Christ, you just you're like, okay, here we go. And you get something that's just minor and you're going, what is this? 20 years later, the Lord has allowed enough things that you've overcome in your life that you're now a warrior. And you are able to handle things and take on challenges that you never could have thought of taking on. But along the way, it hasn't been constant warfare. There's always seasons of refreshing. And we got one of those seasons in Paul's life right in front of us, which is why I've highlighted it, because this isn't just what happened with Paul. We get the same levels of favor. There are times when we are in the midst of the battle, and there are times where we still will have challenges in front of us, but a lot of things can be going right, and refreshing is happening as we go along the way. And we need to take advantage of those times. How do you take advantage of those times? Get rested. How do you take advantage of those times? You study. You grow closer to the Lord. You prepare in whatever way that you can prepare. And then you get ready for whatever the next thing brings. Now, I'm not going to reveal a spoiler by telling you the second time Paul appears before Nero, he doesn't make it out. Okay, you understand that he had to be prepared to lay his life down in martyrdom, and he was able to do it because the Lord had prepared him every step of the way to be a warrior who was then willing to lay down his life gladly. And, we probably, most of us here, have not been called to martyrdom. Don't know that for sure, but we live in the United States of America, and right now at least, we don't generally, do things like kill Christians. However, we still have battles to fight. And we still have things that God has called us to do. And if He's refreshing you, if you're in a time of refreshing right now, take advantage of it. Don't let it go to waste. Use it to get the rest you need, mostly by digging into Him, the Lord, so that you're ready for whatever the next challenge is. Okay, let's pray. Lord, I thank You for this opportunity today to see how Paul handled, how You handled Paul and gave him so much favor. I ask, Lord, that when we're in the midst of favor, that we'd use it to release all the ministry that Paul did. My goodness, just working with people. And I ask that as Paul, that we'd have thankful hearts. He saw those Roman Christians, and the first thing he did was thank You. And I ask that You'd give us such a thankful heart. In Your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.